Silver Ridge, Montana, November 17th, 1955. 18 days, 42 pounds, 17 cents. Three numbers that would change two lives forever. The little girl sat on the wooden steps outside Tucker's general store, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like that was the only thing holding her together. 6 years old, red hair tangled and dull from too many days without washing. A faded blue sweater that had belonged to her mother now worn thin at the elbows. No coat, shoes with holes that let the cold Montana ground bite at her feet. Her name was Emma Sullivan, and she had been waiting for 18 days. In her right hand, she clutched 17 cents, 3 nickels and 2 pennies. The last money her papa had given her before he walked toward Copper Creek Mine and never came back. She had not spent a single coin, not one, because Papa said they would eat together when he returned, and Emma always did what Papa said. The morning air tasted like coming snow, the kind of cold that starts in your lungs and spreads outward until even your thoughts feel frozen. November in Montana did not forgive weakness, and winter was close, now crouching in the mountains like a predator waiting to strike. Main Street stretched before her, a ribbon of dirt and gravel lined with false-fronted buildings that had seen better days. Tucker's General Store, Roy's Diner, Harper's Tavern with its green neon sign flickering even in daylight, the First Bank of Silver Ridge, the Mason Lodge, the Methodist Church with its white steeple pointing at a sky the color of old pewter. 1955 was supposed to be a good year. The war in Korea had been over for 2 years now. President Eisenhower was building highways across America. Television sets were showing up in living rooms. The future was supposed to be bright, full of promise, full of the kind of hope that made men pack up their families and drive west looking for fresh starts. Patrick Sullivan had been one of those men. He had lost his job at a textile mill in Boston, lost his wife Rose to childbirth complications 6 years before, and decided that Montana was where he and his daughter would build a new life. Honest work, clean air, a place where a man could start over and maybe, just maybe, outrun the ghosts of everything he had lost. The mine had hired him in September. Good pay, they said. Steady work. A future. On November 1st, the tunnel collapsed. Patrick Sullivan and 2 other men died instantly, buried under tons of rock and earth in the weight of dreams that would never come true. The mine paid out $500 in insurance money to next of kin. The bodies were buried in the Catholic cemetery on the hill overlooking town. And Emma sat on the steps outside Tucker's, waiting for a father who would never come home. The town moved past her, miners with coal dust ground into the creases of their faces and silver dreams turning to ash in their pockets. Housewives with grocery bags avoiding eye contact because guilt is easier to carry when you do not have to look it in the face. Teenage boys in their father's old Fords laughing at something that did not matter, too young to understand that someday they might be the ones doing the walking past. Some people left food when Mrs. Tucker was not watching. A sandwich here, an apple there, a thermos of soup that had gone cold by the time Emma worked up the courage to drink it. Small acts of kindness that salved consciences without requiring actual commitment. Most left nothing at all. They told themselves the same comfortable lie that humans have been telling themselves since the beginning of time. Someone else would help. Someone always does. Her family would come for her. This was not their responsibility. They had their own problems, their own families, their own struggles. One little girl sitting on cold steps was tragic, certainly, but what could they do? What could one person really do? Emma believed it too, in the way that children believe things, because the alternative is too terrible to consider. Papa had told her to wait right here on these exact steps until he came back from the mine with money for food and a place for them to stay. So she waited and waited and kept waiting, even as the days stretched into weeks and the cold settled into her bones and her body began the slow process of shutting down. On the morning of the 18th day, a stranger drove into town. His name was James Collier, though most people who knew him called him Jim. He was 37 years old, but his eyes belonged to someone much older. Someone who had seen things that carved lines into a man's face and put shadows in places where light could not reach. Jim drove a 1952 Dodge Power Wagon navy blue, faded to the color of old bruises. The truck had seen hard miles, dents in the front bumper, rust creeping along the wheel wells, a crack in the windshield that spiderwebbed across the passenger side like frozen lightning. But the engine ran clean and strong, and that was all that mattered to a man who measured his life in terms of how far he could drive before the next town, the next reason to keep moving. He had been moving for 5 years now. 5 years since he came home from Korea. 5 years since the nightmare started. 5 years since he realized that some things cannot be outrun, but that does not stop a man from trying. Jim was 6'2", 190 pounds of lean muscle and old scars, dark hair going gray at the temples. A face that might have been handsome once before the war, before the guilt, before the years of drinking, just enough whiskey each night to sleep without dreaming. He wore Carhartt work pants, Red Wing boots, and a canvas jacket that had seen him through logging camps in Idaho, construction sites in Nevada, ranch work in Wyoming. A drifter. That was the word people used, though it did not quite capture what he had become. Drifters moved because they wanted to. Jim moved because staying still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant seeing the faces of the men he had left behind on a frozen mountain in North Korea 5 years ago. Staff Sergeant James Collier, 1st Marine Division, Silver Star recipient for actions at the Chosin Reservoir in December of 1950. The citation said he held his position against overwhelming enemy forces, allowing his unit to retreat to safety. It said he showed extraordinary courage under fire. It said he was a hero. The citation did not mention the 23 wounded Marines in the medical tent he had been ordered to abandon. It did not mention how he followed those orders like a good Marine should, because in the military you follow orders even when your gut tells you those orders are wrong. It did not mention that when his unit retook the position 2 days later, all 23 men were frozen solid, their bodies arranged in the positions they had died in, some still reaching for weapons they would never fire again. It especially did not mention Corporal David Chen, Jim's closest friend, who had been in that tent with a piece of shrapnel in his gut and a smile on his face, even as he bled out, telling the medic to tell Jimmy that it was not his fault, that he did his duty, that some decisions have no right answers. Jim carried David's dog tags in his pocket. He had carried them for 5 years through every town, every bottle of whiskey that promised oblivion, but only delivered another morning of waking up and remembering. He was thinking about those dog tags when he saw the little girl. He had come to Silver Ridge because he heard the Copper Creek mine was hiring. Good pay, they said, for men willing to work underground. Jim had done worse. He planned to stay maybe a month, save up enough money for and food, then move on to the next place. The pattern was familiar now. Comfortable in the way that bad habits become comfortable. Never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions. Never putting down roots deep enough that pulling them up would hurt. The truck rolled down Main Street at 20 miles per hour. Jim's eyes scanned the storefronts out of habit, looking for work, looking for a cheap room, looking for anything except what he found. At first, he almost missed her. Just a small shape hunched on the steps of Tucker's general store, easy to overlook in the morning shadows. But something made him look again. Some instinct honed by years of combat, of learning to spot things that did not belong, things that signaled danger or death or decisions that could not be unmade. Jim saw the way she sat, perfectly still, not the restless fidgeting of a child waiting for a parent to finish shopping. This was different. This was the stillness of someone who had been waiting so long that movement itself seemed pointless. The stillness of despair. He saw her size, small, too small. A 6-year-old should weigh more than 42 pounds, should have more color in her face, should not have arms thin enough that you could see the outline of every bone. He saw the way people walked past her, saw them see her and choose not to stop, saw the careful way they adjusted their paths to avoid getting too close, as if poverty and abandonment might be contagious. And Jim saw in that moment of recognition a choice. The easy choice was to keep driving, to tell himself that this was not his problem, not his town, not his responsibility. To do what he had been doing for 5 years, which was to keep moving and let other people handle their own messes. The easy choice had kept him alive in Korea, had kept him sane, or at least functional in the years since. The easy choice was a well-worn path, smooth and familiar. The hard choice was to stop. Jim's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The truck rolled past him 50 feet, 100 feet. He could see Tucker's in the rearview mirror getting smaller. Could see the little girl's shape still motionless, still waiting. In his mind, he saw other shapes, 23 of them, frozen in a medical tent because he had made the easy choice, because he had followed orders, because mission came first and individuals came second, and that was how you won wars, even if it meant losing pieces of yourself that you would never get back. Jim's boot moved to the brake pedal. The truck stopped in the middle of Main Street. For 30 seconds, he sat there, engine idling, hands gripping the wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white, having a conversation with himself that only he could hear. Then he put the truck in reverse. The sound of the engine changing pitch made Emma look up for the first time in hours. She watched as the blue truck backed up and parked directly in front of Tucker's. Watched as the driver's door opened and a tall man climbed out, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body remembered violence and had learned to control it. Jim walked toward the steps. His boots crunched on gravel. His breath came out in small clouds of condensation. He stopped about 10 feet away, far enough not to seem threatening, close enough to see the details that distance had hidden. The girl's lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her fingernails had dirt crusted under them. There were bruises on her arms from where she had curled up against the building at night, trying to find warmth that did not exist. Her eyes were blue clear and bright, and far too old for someone so young. Those eyes reminded him of the orphans in Korea, the ones who had lost everything and learned to expect nothing, the ones who waited because waiting was all they had left. Jim knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. A habit from the war, from dealing with frightened civilians who needed to know you were not a threat. "Kid," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "You waiting for someone?" Emma looked at him with those two old eyes and said, "My papa." The words were simple, certain, absolute in the way that only a child's faith can be absolute. "Where'd he go?" Jim asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer would break his heart. "The mine, Copper Creek." He said, "Wait here till he comes back." Jim glanced down the street toward where the mine road led north into the mountains. Then he looked back at Emma, really looked at her, saw the way her whole body trembled, though she was trying to hide it, saw the 17 cents clutched in her small fist like a talisman against the universe's indifference. "How long you been waiting?" he asked. Emma tilted her head, thinking. "The lady inside says 18 days. 18 days. The words landed like artillery shells. 18 days in November, Montana. 18 days of cold that could kill a grown man, let alone a child. 18 days of hunger and fear, and clinging to a promise that Jim knew with the terrible certainty of experience would never be kept. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Emma Sullivan. My mama was Rose, but she's in heaven. She died when I was born." "I'm Jim Collier." Emma studied his face with the careful attention that children give to adults when they are trying to decide if trust is warranted or if this is just another person who will promise help and then disappear. "When's the last time you ate, Emma?" She looked down at the 17 cents. "I have money for when Papa comes. Then we eat together." Jim felt something twist in his chest, the kind of pain that is worse than any physical wound because it comes from seeing innocence that is about to be shattered and knowing you are the one who will have to do the shattering. He stood up and looked at Tucker's general store. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Tucker behind the counter, carefully not looking in their direction. He looked at Roy's diner across the street where he could see people eating breakfast, warm and safe, and determinedly ignorant. Then he looked back at Emma. "There's a place across the street," he said, pointing to Roy's. "I can see these steps from the window. You can see the road. If your papa comes, you'll be the first to know. How about we get you something warm to eat?" Emma hesitated. Her eyes went to the steps as if leaving them might break some sacred covenant, as if the only thing keeping her father alive was her absolute obedience to his last instruction. "You promise I can see the road?" she asked. "I promise. And if Papa comes, you'll tell me right away, the second I see him." Emma stood slowly. Her legs were unsteady from sitting in the same position for so long, from 18 days of malnutrition and exposure. She wavered and Jim instinctively reached out to steady her. Her hand, when she placed it in his, was cold, impossibly light, like holding a sparrow that might fly away at any moment or might simply stop breathing because it had forgotten how. They crossed Main Street together, this broken man and this waiting child. neither of them knowing yet that this moment would change everything, that 18 days of waiting was about to end, but a different kind of waiting, the kind that leads to healing, was just beginning. Roy's diner smelled like coffee and frying bacon, and the kind of warmth that only comes from places where people gather to forget for a moment that the world outside can be cruel. The door chimed when Jim pushed it open. Heads turned, conversations paused. Behind the counter stood Roy Hastings, 52 years old Korean War veteran, who had left his left leg somewhere near Incheon and came home to open a diner because what else was a one-legged former Army sergeant going to do with the rest of his life? He took one look at Jim and Emma and his face did something complicated. Relief mixed with shame mixed with anger at himself and everyone else who had walked past that little girl for 18 days. Finally, Roy said quietly, someone with the guts to do something. Just feeding a kid, Jim replied. Sure you are, Marine. Jim stiffened. How'd you know? Roy pointed at the way Jim stood, the way he moved, the way his eyes automatically scanned the room for exits and threats. Army can spot a Marine a mile away. Plus you got that chosen look, the one that says you've seen winter in hell and came back carrying it in your chest. Jim did not respond to that. Instead, he guided Emma to a booth by the window, a booth where she could see Tucker's general store across the street, could see the steps where she had waited, could watch for a father who would never come. What do you want to eat, Emma? Jim asked. She stared at the menu with wide eyes. So many choices, too many. When you have been starving for 18 days, abundance becomes overwhelming. I don't know, she whispered. Roy appeared beside the booth. He had a limp, but he moved with practiced efficiency. How about some scrambled eggs, toast, and hot chocolate? That sound good? Emma nodded. Make it two, Jim said. He was not particularly hungry, but eating with her seemed important. Seemed like the kind of thing a person should do when sitting across from a child who had forgotten what it felt like to not be alone. Roy went to the kitchen. Jim sat across from Emma and tried not to stare at how thin she was, how her sweater hung off her shoulders like it was 2 sizes too big, how her eyes kept darting to the window, watching. Always watching. Emma, he said carefully, I need to ask you something. Your papa, when he left for the mine, did he say anything else? Anything about where you should go if he didn't come back? He said, wait on the steps. He always comes back. He always keeps his promises. The absolute certainty in her voice was a knife in Jim's gut. Roy came back with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, set them down gently, caught Jim's eye and gave a small shake of his head, a gesture that said, we need to talk, but not in front of the kid. Emma wrapped both hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. She took a small sip, and her eyes went wide. It's sweet. Drink it slow, Roy said. Your stomach needs to remember how to handle food. She drank slowly, carefully, like someone relearning a skill they had almost lost. Jim drank his own coffee and watched her and felt the weight of a decision forming in his chest. The kind of decision that you know will change your life, but you make it anyway because the alternative is to keep being the person you have been, and maybe that person is not worth keeping. Roy brought the food, scrambled eggs golden and fluffy, toast with butter melting into the surface. More food than Emma had seen in weeks. She stared at it like it might disappear. Go ahead, Jim said. It's yours. She ate the way starving things eat. At first with desperate speed, shoveling food into her mouth with trembling hands. Then slower as her body began to trust that this was real, that the food would not vanish, that this was not a dream from which she would wake still cold and still hungry on wooden steps. Jim ate mechanically, not tasting anything. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, trying to figure out what came next when you stopped for a child and realized that stopping was not enough, that sometimes stopping was just the beginning. Roy returned with a coffee pot and topped off Jim's mug. Then he leaned in close and said very quietly, you know her father's dead, right? Jim's hand froze halfway to his mouth. How long? 16 days. Mine collapsed November 1st. Killed Patrick Sullivan and 2 others. Whole town knows. Jim set his coffee down carefully, using the kind of control that keeps your hands from shaking when rage starts building in your blood. And nobody told her. Her uncle's supposed to handle it. Family business, they said. She's got family. Roy's expression turned dark, bitter. Oh, she's got family. Vincent Harper owns half this town, Collected $500 insurance money when Patrick died. Let that little girl sit on those steps for 16 days knowing damn well her father was never coming back. Why? Roy glanced around the diner, making sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely carried over the sound of grease sizzling on the griddle. Because Vincent's got a side business. Kids nobody wants. He sells them. The words hit Jim like a physical blow. For a moment, he could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the same cold rage that had filled him in Korea when he found civilians executed by retreating Chinese forces. The rage that made him human and dangerous in equal measure. Tell me everything, Jim said. Roy told him. About Sarah Chen in 1947, 9-year-old Chinese orphan. Vincent adopted her supposedly. She disappeared 4 months later. Rumor was she went to relatives in Idaho, but Roy had heard different. Had heard she ended up in Spokane in a house where children were not children anymore. About Tommy Walsh in 1949. 7-year-old father killed in the mines. Vincent took custody. The boy vanished to California, supposedly. No one ever checked. About Maria Santos in 1952, Mexican girl 10 years old. Last seen boarding a Greyhound bus with one of Vincent's associates. About Bobby Miller's little sister in 1954, 8-year-old parents killed in a car crash. Vincent got guardianship through the courts, everything legal and proper. Bobby swore he saw her in Salt Lake City 6 months later, but he was just a kid. Who would believe him? There's a man in Denver, Roy said. Clayton Ford, runs what they call a placement service. Buys kids from men like Vincent, sells them to whoever's buying. Some go to families who need servants. Some go to worse. Ford moves maybe 40 kids a year across the Mountain West. Vincent supplies a dozen or so. And the law does nothing, Jim said flatly. Vincent owns Sheriff Tom Hendricks, owns Judge Preston too. Got enough money and connections that nobody asks hard questions. Jim looked at Emma. She had finished eating and was staring out the window again, watching the steps across the street, with the patience of someone who had learned that patience was the only thing left when hope ran out. How long before Vincent makes his move? Jim asked. Court hearing takes 2 weeks, maybe 3. He'll file for a custody claim. He's her only family, and Judge Preston will hand her over. Then she's on a bus to Denver, and that's the end of it. Jim drank his coffee. It tasted like ash. Like all the choices he had made in Korea, coming back to show him what happens when good men stand by and do nothing. I need to see Doc Pierce, he said. Upstairs. He runs a practice above the diner. Roy paused. Jim, whatever you're thinking, you need to know what you're up against. Vincent Harper is not some small-time crook. He's smart, connected, ruthless. He's killed before to protect his operation. How upon him, Bobby Miller's father, started asking questions about his daughter after she disappeared. Died in a hunting accident 2 months later. Sheriff ruled it accidental. Convenient timing. Jim stood up, pulled out his wallet, and put money on the table for the food. Keep her here, he said. I'll be back. Where are you going? To figure out how to fight a war. Roy watched him head for the stairs, then looked at Emma. The little girl was still watching the window, still waiting, still believing in promises that had already been broken. Kid, Roy said gently, you want some more hot chocolate? Emma nodded without looking away from the glass. Upstairs in an office that smelled of antiseptic and old books and cigar smoke, Jim found Dr. Raymond Pierce, 61 years old. Navy doctor in World War II, had landed at Normandy with the first waves and spent 6 hours doing surgery on a beach, while German artillery turned the sand red. He had seen enough death to know it when it walked through his door. You're the Marine, Doc Pierce said without preamble, the one who finally stopped for Emma. Word travels fast. Small town, and you're the first person in 18 days to do more than drop a sandwich and keep walking. Doc gestured to a chair. Sit down, we need to talk. Jim sat, the chair creaked under his weight. Emma's father is dead, Doc said. Has been for 16 days. Mine collapse. Patrick Sullivan was a good man. Came here from Boston looking for a fresh start after his wife died. Worked hard, loved his daughter. The mine killed him on his second day underground. Why didn't anyone tell Emma? Because her uncle Vincent Harper wanted her desperate first. Wanted her scared and alone, and willing to go anywhere with anyone who promised safety. It's his pattern. Let the kids get weak, then swoop in like a savior. gets them to trust him, sign papers get into his car. By the time anyone asks questions, the kid is 3 states away, and the paper trail says everything was legal. How many? Well, that I know of 4 in the last 8 years. That I suspect more. Jim leaned forward, elbows on knees. What do I need to do to stop him? Doc Pierce pulled out a file folder, opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, photocopied legal documents. You need a bribe, steady, legitimate employment. You need housing, a stable place to live. You need character witnesses, people who will testify in court that you can provide a safe home. And you need legal standing to challenge Vincent's custody claim. I'm a stranger, drifter, no ties to this place, which is why you have maybe 2 weeks to change that. Vincent will file for custody tomorrow. Judge Preston will schedule a hearing. At that hearing, Vincent will present himself as Emma's only living relative, a man of means and standing, and you will present as nothing, unless you become something. What about proving Vincent is unfit, the trafficking, the other kids? Doc Pierce's face went hard. I tried that 5 years ago with Sarah Chen, contacted state authorities. Vincent threatened to ruin me. Medical board investigation, malpractice suits. I backed down. He paused. I've saved hundreds of lives, but I could not save one little girl because I was scared. I think about that every night. Then help me save this one. How? You have no job, no home, no legal standing. You're a drifter with a military record that includes 23 dead Marines under your command. Jim flinched. How do you know about that? Because I read, because Silver Star recipients make the papers, and because Vincent Harper will have already done his research. He knows who you are, knows about Chosin, and he will use it against you in court. Let him. Jim stood up. I've spent 5 years running from what happened in Korea, running from the choice I made to follow orders instead of staying with my men. Maybe it's time I stopped running. Stopping and winning are 2 different things. Then tell me what I need to win. Doc Pierce studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. Mackenzie Ranch, 5 miles north. Thomas Mackenzie needs a foreman. He's honest, tough, but fair. If he hires you, that's steady work and a place to stay. That's your first step. What else? Roy will testify. So will I. We'll need more. Reverend Clark from the Methodist Church. Maybe Sarah Bennett. She teaches at the elementary school. People with standing in the community who can vouch for your character. And proving Vincent's unfit, that's harder. We have rumors, suspicions, patterns, but no hard evidence. No witnesses willing to testify. The kids he sold are gone. The families he sold them to are not talking. It's a ghost trail. Jim thought about Korea, about following orders into darkness, about the moment when duty and conscience collide and you have to choose which one matters more. Then I'll make evidence, he said. How sorry? Same way we did in the Marines, reconnaissance, surveillance. Build a file on what Vincent does, who he talks to, where he goes. Document everything. That's dangerous. Vincent has killed before. So have I. Jim headed for the door. I'll be at Mackenzie Ranch by this afternoon. Tell Roy to keep Emma safe. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Jim, Doc called after him. Why are you doing this? You don't owe this girl anything. You could drive away right now and no one would blame you. Jim stopped in the doorway, looked back. 23 Marines froze to death in Korea because I followed orders to retreat. I've carried that for 5 years. Every mile, every bottle, every night I close my eyes and see their faces. He paused. I'm not walking past Emma, not her, not anymore. He went back downstairs. Emma was still at the window booth, her small face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the pain as she watched for a ghost that would never materialize. Jim slid into the booth across from her. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes. Emma, he said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to be brave. Can you do that? She nodded slowly. There was an accident at the mine. Your papa was hurt. He's not coming back. The silence that followed was deeper than any sound. The world kept turning. The diner kept humming with conversation. And a 6-year-old girl learned that sometimes waiting, no matter how faithful, no matter how long, cannot bring back what is lost. Emma did not cry at first. did not scream or pull away. She just sat very still as if her body had forgotten how to move, as if the news had frozen her from the inside out. No, she said quietly, small voice, correcting a simple mistake. No, you're wrong. Jim felt his chest tighten until breathing hurt. I wish I was wrong. He promised he would not break a promise. Her voice was getting smaller, younger, more desperate. I know he did, and he meant it, but sometimes things happen that are bigger than promises. Emma stood up suddenly, shaking her head. Small movements at first, then bigger. I waited. Every day. I didn't leave. I did what he said. You did everything right, Jim said gently. This is not your fault. Then why? The word broke into pieces as she said it. Why did he leave me? He did not want to. He would have come back if he could. Emma took a step back, then another, as if the floor beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. Her breathing got faster. Her hands started to shake. Then the tears came, all at once, like a dam breaking. Grief pouring out in waves that shook her small body. Jim did the only thing he could. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and let her cry into his jacket. She was so light, impossibly small, like holding all the sadness in the world compressed into 42 pounds of heartbreak. Roy came over quietly, put a hand on Emma's back, said nothing because sometimes there are no words that help. Emma cried until she had no tears left. Then she cried some more dry sobs that sounded like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Jim held her through all of it. This stranger who had chosen not to walk past, this broken man who knew exactly what it felt like to be left behind. When the crying finally slowed, Emma looked up at him with red eyes and a face wet with tears. What happens to me now, she asked. The question hit harder than any blow Jim had ever taken. I don't know yet, he said, because lying would have been worse. But I'm going to figure it out. Will you leave? Jim thought about leaving, about how easy it would be to walk out that door, get in his truck, and drive away from this problem that was not his to solve. He thought about 5 years of running, 5 years of telling himself that staying meant facing things he could not bear to face. Then he looked at Emma's face and saw something that made the decision for him. Not Corporal David Chen, not the 23 frozen Marines, just a 6-year-old girl who had waited 18 days for someone to care. No, Jim said, and the word felt like an anchor dropping, like the end of running, like the beginning of something he did not have a name for yet. I'm not going to leave. Promise. Jim had not made a promise in 5 years. Promises meant responsibility. Promises meant staying. Promises meant caring about something more than the next town, the next job, the next escape. But he looked at Emma, and he made the only choice that mattered. I promise. Emma leaned against him, exhausted from crying, exhausted from 18 days of waiting, exhausted from being 6 years old in a world that did not care. Roy brought a blanket, wrapped it around Emma's shoulders. There's a room upstairs, he said. Small but warm. She can rest there. Jim carried Emma up the stairs. She weighed almost nothing. In the small room there was a bed with clean sheets and a window that looked out at the mountains. Emma climbed onto the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. Can I see the steps from here? She asked. Jim looked out the window. No, but you don't need to watch anymore. Emma's eyes were already closing, sleep coming to claim her whether she wanted it or not. Jim, she whispered. Yes. My papa used to sing to me when I was scared. What did he sing? An Irish song about a baby sleeping. I don't remember the words. Jim sat in the chair beside the bed. He did not know the song, did not know any songs, but he stayed, and sometimes staying is its own kind of music. Emma fell asleep, still clutching her 17 cents, still holding on to the last thing her father had given her, still waiting even in her dreams for someone who would never come. Jim sat in that chair until the sun went down and Silver Ridge grew dark. Then he walked downstairs to find Doc Pierce waiting for him. I need to know everything about Vincent Harper, Jim said, and Doc Pierce told him. Vincent Harper was 49 years old, born in Philadelphia, to a family with old money and older secrets. He had come west in 1947 with a leather suitcase full of cash and a reputation he was trying to outrun. The rumors said he had worked for the Chicago outfit running numbers and collecting debts in ways that left no witnesses. The rumors said a young woman had turned up dead in Lake Michigan, and Vincent's name had been whispered in back rooms where police captains and aldermen made their quiet arrangements. Nothing was ever proven. Nothing was ever charged. But Vincent Harper left Chicago in the middle of a February night and never looked back. Silver Ridge welcomed him the way small towns welcome anyone with money and charm. He bought Harper's Tavern in his first month, a rundown bar on Main Street that he transformed into the town's social center. Then he bought shares in the Copper Creek mine, then rental properties, then the debts of men who needed money and were not careful about the interest rates they agreed to. By 1955, Vincent Harper owned half of Silver Ridge. The other half owed him favors. Doc Pierce laid it all out in the upstairs office while the sun set behind the mountains and the temperature dropped toward freezing. He had been keeping records for years, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, dates and names and patterns that added up to something dark. The children started disappearing in 1947, Doc said. Always orphans, always alone, always with Vincent somehow connected. He showed Jim the list. Sarah Chen, 9 years old. Parents died of cholera on a wagon train heading west. Vincent took her in supposedly to help her find relatives in Idaho. 4 months later, she was gone. Official story, sent to live with an aunt in Boise. Real story. Father O'Brien from the Catholic Church saw her 2 years later in Spokane working in a house where children should never be. When he tried to help, she ran from him. She had been trained to run from anyone who might ask questions. Tommy Walsh, 7, father killed in a mine collapse in 49. Mother had died in childbirth years before. No other family. Vincent petitioned for guardianship through the courts. Everything legal. Judge Preston signed the papers. 2 months later, Tommy was on a bus to California, supposedly to live with distant cousins. No one ever verified. No one ever checked. Maria Santos, 10, Mexican family passing through Montana on their way to Washington State, looking for farm work. Parents killed when their truck went off Highway 12 in a snowstorm. Maria survived. Vincent took custody, promising to find her relatives in Mexico. She lasted 3 months before disappearing to parts unknown. Sheriff Hendricks filed a missing persons report that went nowhere. Bobby Miller's sister, Amy, 8 years old. Parents died in a car accident on the same stretch of highway that killed Maria's family. People started wondering if maybe that stretch of road was not as dangerous as Vincent Harper was efficient. Bobby was 16, old enough to notice things. He swore he saw Amy in Salt Lake City 6 months after Vincent took custody. Saw her getting into a car with a man who looked at her the way predators look at prey. But Bobby was just a kid, and who believes a kid when a respected businessman says everything is fine? 4 children in 8 years, Doc said, that we know about. How many others? How many kids passed through Silver Ridge that nobody remembers? Runaways, drifters, children of migrants who died on the road and left no records behind. Jim studied the list. His hands were steady, but something cold was building in his chest. The same cold he had felt in Korea when he found villages where everyone had been executed, where the snow was red and the silence was complete and the only witnesses were the dead. You said there's a man in Denver, Clayton Ford, runs what he calls a placement service. On paper, it's legitimate, finding homes for orphans, connecting needy children with families who can care for them. On paper, he's a humanitarian. And in reality, he's a flesh peddler. Buys kids from suppliers like Vincent, sells them to whoever's buying. Some go to families who need servants, farm labor, factory work in places where child labor laws are suggestions, not rules. Some go to worse places, places where children stop being children. Doc pulled out a photocopied article from the Denver Post. Federal authorities have been investigating Ford for 18 months. U.S. Marshal named Edward Davis out of the Denver office. Building a case, but it's slow. These men are careful. They hide behind legitimate businesses, legal documents, blood relations. Hard to prosecute when everything looks proper on paper. How many kids? Ford Marshal Davis thinks maybe 40 a year across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah. Vincent supplies 8 to 12 of those. There are others, men in other towns running the same operation. It's a network. Jim stood and walked to the window. Below Main Street was dark except for the neon glow from Harper's Tavern. He could see shapes moving behind the green-tinted windows, could hear faint music drifting on the cold air. Laughter. The sound of people having a good time oblivious to the fact that the man serving their drinks bought and sold children like livestock. What do I need to stop him? Jim asked. Legally proof that Vincent is unfit to be Emma's guardian. Testimony about the trafficking operation. Witnesses willing to go on record. Evidence that will stand up in court. And realistically, Doc Pierce was quiet for a moment. Realistically, you need a miracle. Vincent has Judge Preston in his pocket, has Sheriff Hendricks on his payroll, has enough dirt on enough people that no one wants to cross him. The legal system is designed to protect blood relatives. Emma is Vincent's great niece. You're a stranger who rolled into town yesterday. Even with witnesses, even with evidence, the law favors Vincent. Then I'll change what the law favors. How? Jim turned from the window. Same way we fought in Korea. You don't beat an enemy by playing by rules they've already rigged. You find their weak points. You exploit them. You make them react instead of act. You force them into mistakes. This isn't war, Jim. Yes, it is. Vincent Harper is fighting a war against children who can't fight back. That makes it a war. And I know how to fight wars. Doc studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out another piece of paper. Thomas Mackenzie, 68 years old, runs a cattle ranch 5 miles north of town. Lost his son at Bastonia in World War II. Good man, honest. He needs a foreman. If he'll hire you, that's step one. I'll go tomorrow morning. What about Emma? Roy said she can stay here tonight. I'll be back by dawn. Doc nodded. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Poured 2 fingers in each, slid one across the desk to Jim. To making the right choice, Doc said. Jim picked up the glass, looked at the amber liquid. He had been drinking whiskey every night for 5 years. Just enough to sleep. Just enough to not dream. Just enough to keep the ghosts at bay. He set the glass down without drinking. Not tonight, he said. Tonight I need to be clear-headed. Doc raised his eyebrows but said nothing. Just drank his own whiskey and watched as Jim walked out into the cold Montana night. Jim slept in his truck that night, parked behind Roy's diner wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the stars through the cracked windshield. The same stars he had watched in Korea. The same stars that had looked down on the chosen reservoir while good men froze to death because he followed orders. He did not sleep well, but he did not drink. And when the sun came up cold and pale over the mountains, he was ready. Emma was still asleep when Jim checked on her at 0600 hours. Roy's wife Helen had stayed with her through the night, a grandmother-shaped woman with kind eyes and hands that knew how to comfort frightened children. She whispered that Emma had woken up 3 times crying, each time asking if her papa was really gone, each time needing to hear the truth again before she could believe it. She'll need time, Helen said. Grief doesn't run on schedules. I know, Jim said. Tell her I'll be back this afternoon. Tell her I'm keeping my promise. He drove north on Highway 12 as the sun climbed and the temperature stayed below freezing. The Dodge's heater barely worked, but Jim had been colder. Had been so cold in Korea that his eyelashes froze together and his fingers turned blue, and the air itself felt like it was trying to kill him. Montana in November was harsh, but it was not Chosin. Mackenzie Ranch appeared after 20 minutes of driving through country that looked like God had sketched it in charcoal and forgotten to add color. Brown grass, gray sky, black mountains. The ranch house sat in a valley with the Rockies rising behind it like a wall between earth and heaven. Thomas Mackenzie was feeding cattle when Jim pulled up, 68 years old, built from the same hard material as the land he worked. Tall, weathered, moving with the careful economy of someone whose body had served him well for nearly 7 decades and deserved respect for its service. He watched Jim climb out of the truck, watched the way Jim moved, the military bearing that never quite goes away, no matter how many years you spend trying to be civilian. You're the Marine, Thomas said. Not a question. Word travels. Small town, and you did something nobody else had the stones to do. Thomas set down his bucket of feed. Roy called last night, said you'd be coming, said you need work. Yes, sir, looking for steady employment. Ranch experience in Wyoming. Construction, logging. Can do most anything that needs doing. Why here, why now? Jim met his eyes. Because there's a little girl in town who needs someone to stand up for her. And I can't do that if I'm drifting. Need to put down roots long enough to matter. Thomas nodded slowly. The Sullivan girl. Heard about her papa, heard about her uncle too. He paused. You know what you're getting into with Vincent Harper? I'm starting to. And you're doing it anyway. Yes, sir. Thomas walked over to a corral where a young horse was testing the fence looking for weak points. See that mare name's Tempest, through my last foreman, broke his arm. Been looking for someone who can handle difficult horses in difficult situations. You interested? What's it pay? $50 a week. Cabin on the north end of the property. 3 meals a day if you want them. Hard work, long hours, honest. Jim looked at the horse, looked at the ranch, looked at Thomas Mackenzie, and saw something he had not seen in a long time. A man who meant what he said, who offered work without games or angles or hidden costs. I need to be clear about something first, Jim said. This personal situation with Emma, it's going to get complicated. Vincent Harper won't take kindly to me interfering. There might be trouble. What kind of trouble? Legal, maybe worse. Vincent's killed before to protect his operation. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my son died at Bastonia because good men stood their ground when it would have been easier to retreat. You're standing your ground. Whatever trouble comes, we'll handle it together. They shook hands. Thomas's grip was firm, calloused, honest. Start today, Thomas asked. Rather start now if that's acceptable. Got 2 weeks to prove I'm worth keeping. 2 weeks for what? Custody hearing. Vincent's going to file today or tomorrow. Judge will schedule it fast. I need to walk into that courtroom with a job, a home, and enough character witnesses that even a bought judge has to think twice. Thomas smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had fought his own wars and understood what it meant to dig in for a battle. Then let's get started. Jim worked that first day like a man possessed, mending fences that winter had damaged, moving hay bales, breaking ice on water troughs, learning the rhythms of the ranch and the personalities of the animals and the 1,000 small tasks that keep a place alive when the land itself seems determined to kill it. Thomas watched him work and said little. But when the sun started to set and Jim prepared to head back to town, Thomas called him over. You're hired permanent if you want it, Thomas said. Not because you're running from Vincent Harper. Because you work like you mean it, like it matters. That's rare. It does matter, all of it. The cabin's ready, small but warm. You can move in tomorrow. Bring the girl if you want. My wife Martha, she's got a soft spot for kids who need looking after. Jim felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Vincent's going to come at you hard. He doesn't like losing. Neither do I. Jim drove back to Silver Ridge as darkness fell, and the temperature dropped, and the first stars appeared like bullet holes in the fabric of the sky. He found Emma at Roy's Diner, sitting at the same booth by the window, cleaned up now, but still small, still fragile, still watching the world like she expected it to hurt her. She looked up when he walked in. Her face did something complicated when she saw him. Relief mixed with fear, mixed with the beginning of something that might have been trust if given enough time to grow. You came back, she said. Told you I would. Marines keep their word. Are you really a Marine? Jim pulled the dog tags from around his neck, his own and David Chen's, handed them to Emma. She studied them with the seriousness that children bring to artifacts from adult worlds they do not fully understand. What do these mean? She asked. They mean I was part of something bigger than myself. They mean I made promises to other people and tried to keep them. They mean I failed sometimes, but I kept trying. Emma handed them back. Did you fail a lot? Yes. Are you going to fail me? The question was knife sharp, honest in the way that only children can be honest before the world teaches them that some truths are too hard to speak aloud. I don't know, Jim said. I'm going to try my hardest not to, but I can't promise I'll win. I can only promise I'll fight. Emma thought about that. Then she said, Papa used to say trying matters more than winning. He said you can't always control what happens, but you can control how hard you try. Your papa was a smart man. He was the best man. Her voice cracked. And now he's gone, and I don't know what to do. Jim slid into the booth across from her. I got a job today, at a ranch north of town. There's a cabin there. It's small, but it's warm and safe. Would you want to stay there with me? For how long? As long as you need. What if you leave it like everyone else? I'm not going to leave, I promised. But what if you die like Papa? Jim had no good answer for that. Could not promise immortality. Could not guarantee safety in a world that killed good men for no reason at all. So he told her the only truth he had. I can't promise I'll live forever, Emma. Nobody can. But I can promise that while I'm alive, I won't leave you alone. I will fight for you every day. And if something happens to me, I'll make sure there are other good people who will take care of you. You won't be abandoned again. That's my promise. Emma looked at him with those two old eyes. Then she nodded. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll come with you. Roy brought over 2 pieces of apple pie, set them down with a smile on the house for people making good decisions. Emma picked up her fork and took a small bite, then a bigger one. She was starting to eat like a normal child again, starting to remember that food was not something you had to ration and save, that tomorrow would come with more meals, more safety, more reasons to keep going. Jim ate his pie and watched her and felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing, heavy, demanding, impossible to ignore. That night, Emma slept in the room above the diner and Jim slept in his truck. Not because there was no other place, but because he needed to think, needed to plan, needed to figure out how to fight a man who owned a town and had killed to keep his secrets. The next morning, Vincent Harper made his move. Jim was having breakfast at Roy's when Sheriff Tom Hendricks walked in. 45 years old, soft in the middle with the kind of weak chin that suggests a weak spine to match. He wore his badge like it was a prop in a play he did not believe in. Jim Collier, Hendricks asked. That's me. Vincent Harper is filing for custody of Emma Sullivan today. Hearing scheduled for December 9th, 2 weeks from now. He's her legal next of kin. You interfere, that's kidnapping. Jim set down his coffee. I'm not kidnapping anyone. Emma's staying with me because I'm providing a safe home and her uncle left her to starve on the street for 18 days. That's not how Mr. Harper tells it. I'm sure it's not. Hendricks shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Like a man who knew he was on the wrong side but did not have the courage to switch. Look, Collier, I'm just doing my job. Vincent's got the law on his side. He's blood family. You're nobody. Judge Preston's going to roll in his favor, and then this whole thing will be over. We'll see. You don't want to make an enemy of Vincent Harper. He's got resources, connections, ways of making life difficult for people who cross him. Jim stood up, used his height, let Hendricks feel the difference between a career lawman who had never seen real violence and a Marine who had waded through it in Korea and come back carrying the weight of 23 dead friends. Sheriff, Jim said quietly, I've made enemies of people who were trying to kill me with artillery and bayonets in weather that would kill you just for standing still. Vincent Harper doesn't scare me, and if he wants a fight, he'll get one. Hendricks took a step back. Just remember I warned you. He left. The door chimed behind him. Roy limped over with the coffee pot. That was stupid. Probably. Vincent's going to escalate now. He doesn't like being challenged. Good. When people escalate, they make mistakes. Mistakes leave evidence. You sound like you've done this before. Different war. Same principles. Emma came downstairs dressed in clothes that Helen had found for her. Clean jeans, a warm sweater, shoes that fit. She looked more like a normal 6-year-old and less like a ghost. Morning, sweetheart, Jim said. You hungry? She nodded. Roy brought pancakes. Emma ate quietly, but Jim could see her watching him, studying him, trying to figure out if he was someone she could trust or just another adult who would promise safety and deliver disappointment. After breakfast, Jim drove Emma to Mackenzie Ranch. Thomas and his wife Martha were waiting. Martha was 65, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen hard years and chosen kindness anyway. She took one look at Emma and her expression went soft. Oh, honey, Martha said, come here, let's get you settled. She led Emma toward the main house talking about cookies and warm milk and a room that overlooked the mountains. Emma went with her, looking back at Jim once to make sure he was not leaving. I'll be here, Jim called. Working with Thomas. You need me, just holler. Thomas watched them go. Martha lost 3 children before they turned 5. Scarlet fever, diphtheria, pneumonia, back in the 20s and 30s before penicillin. She's been wanting to mother someone for 30 years. Emma needs mothering. So do you probably, but you're too stubborn to admit it. Thomas handed Jim a pair of work gloves. Come on, fence in the south pasture needs mending. Good way to think while you work. They worked through the morning. Jim's body remembered ranch labor, the rhythm of hammering posts, the tension of stretching wire, the satisfaction of fixing something broken. Around noon, a car appeared on the ranch road. Black Cadillac Series 62. The kind of car that cost more than most people in Silver Ridge made in a year. Vincent Harper had arrived. He climbed out of the Cadillac wearing an expensive suit that looked wrong against the backdrop of mud and cattle and honest work. 49 years old, but aging well, the kind of man who could charm his way into trust and then use that trust like a weapon. Slicked back hair, thin mustache, smile that never reached his eyes. Mr. Mackenzie, Vincent said. I hope I'm not interrupting. You are, Thomas replied. Vincent's smile tightened. I'm looking for my niece, Emma Sullivan. I have reason to believe she's here. She is. I'll be taking her home now. No, you won't. Vincent turned to Jim. And you must be Mr. Collier, the Good Samaritan. I appreciate you looking after Emma temporarily, but family takes precedence now. I'm her only living relative. Jim set down his hammer, faced Vincent. Emma stays here. I don't think you understand how the law works. Blood relation, legal guardianship. Judge Preston has already indicated he'll rule in my favor. Then let him rule. Until he does, Emma's under my care. Vincent's charm evaporated. What replaced it was something cold, calculating. The face he wore when the mask came off and you saw what lived underneath. Mr. Collier, I've done my research on you. Staff Sergeant James Collier, 1st Marine Division, Chosen Reservoir. Silver Star for heroism. Very impressive. But I also know about the 23 Marines who died under your command. About how you followed orders to retreat and left wounded men to freeze. How does it feel being called a hero for abandoning your brothers? Jim's hands clenched. Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. Steady, grounding. You don't know anything about Korea, Jim said. His voice was level, but something dangerous moved behind it. I know enough. I know that when Judge Preston hears about your past, about your inability to protect the men counting on you, he's going to ask himself a very simple question. Can we trust this man with a vulnerable child? Better question, Jim said. Can we trust a man who let his niece starve for 18 days while he counted insurance money? I was giving her time to process her grief. I didn't want to overwhelm her. You were waiting for her to get desperate enough to go anywhere with anyone. That's your pattern. Sarah Chen, Tommy Walsh, Maria Santos, Bobby Miller's sister. You wait until kids are broken, then you swoop in and sell them. Vincent's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, reassessment. This was not going the way he had planned. Careful, Mr. Collier. Slander is a crime. You make accusations you can't prove. I'll have Sheriff Hendricks arrest you for defamation. Then arrest me. Let's see what happens when this goes to trial and people start asking questions about where all those kids went. Vincent straightened his tie. 2 weeks, Mr. Collier. Custody hearing December 9th. Judge Preston will grant custody to me, and this will all be over. You can go back to drifting, and Emma will come home where she belongs. He walked back to his Cadillac, paused with his hand on the door. One more thing, Vincent called. Accidents happen on ranches. Fences break, cattle stampede, buildings catch fire. Would be a shame if something happened to Mackenzie Ranch because you're too stubborn to know when you're beaten. He drove away, leaving dust hanging in the cold air. Thomas watched the Cadillac disappear. He just threatened us. I noticed, and you're not backing down. No, sir. Thomas picked up his hammer. Then I guess we better finish this fence. Might need it to be strong for what's coming. They worked through the afternoon. As the sun started to set, Emma came out of the main house with Martha. She looked better, color in her cheeks, a little more life in her eyes. Jim, she called, Mrs. Mackenzie made cookies. Do you want some? Jim looked at this little girl who had lost everything and was trying to figure out how to keep living. Looked at Thomas and Martha, who were risking their ranch to do the right thing. Looked at the fence they were building and saw it for what it was, a line being drawn. A declaration that some things were worth fighting for. Yeah, sweetheart, Jim said. I'd like that. That night, after Emma was asleep in the main house and Jim had moved his few possessions into the foreman's cabin, Thomas came by with 2 cups of coffee. They sat on the cabin's small porch and watched the stars come out. "You know this is going to get worse before it gets better," Thomas said. "I know. Vincent's not bluffing about the accidents. He's careful, but he's ruthless. Bobby Miller's father died in a hunting accident 2 months after he started asking questions. Convenient timing. I'll be careful. Being careful might not be enough." Thomas drank his coffee. "You need evidence. Real evidence that will stand up in court. Witnesses willing to testify. Something Judge Preston can't ignore even if Vincent owns him. Working on it." "How?" "I'm going to do what we did in Korea when we needed intelligence. Reconnaissance. Surveillance. Build a file on Vincent's activities. Who he meets, where he goes, what he does, document everything." "That's dangerous." "So was chosen. I survived that. Barely from what I've read." Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "In Korea, I followed orders even when my gut told me those orders were wrong. 23 men died because I chose duty over conscience. I've spent 5 years running from that choice. But I'm done running. Emma needs someone to stand up for her, and it's going to be me, whatever it costs." Thomas nodded. "Then you'll need help. I've got friends in town, people who owe me favors, people who remember what it was like before Vincent Harper bought half of Silver Ridge. I'll talk to them." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything, haven't even really started fighting." They finished their coffee in silence. Above them, the stars turned in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. The same stars that had watched over Korea. The same stars that had seen men freeze to death while other men lived with the guilt. The same stars that would keep turning long after this particular fight was won or lost. Jim went inside the cabin. It was small as promised. A single room with a wood stove, a bed, a table, 2 chairs. Everything a man needed and nothing he didn't. He built a fire in the stove and sat at the table and pulled out a notebook he had bought at Tucker's General Store. At the top of the first page, he wrote Vincent Harper. Then he started documenting everything he knew, everything Doc Pierce had told him, everything Roy had mentioned, every name, every date, every pattern, building a case the way Marines build fortifications, one fact at a time, one piece of evidence at a time, until the structure was strong enough to withstand whatever assault came. He worked until midnight. Then he slept for 4 hours. Then he woke and started the next day. The pattern continued for a week. Jim worked the ranch during the day, mending fences, training horses, proving to Thomas that he was worth keeping, proving to himself that he could be more than a drifter, that he could be someone who stayed. Emma adjusted slowly. Martha took her shopping for clothes, enrolled her in Silver Ridge Elementary School, taught her how to make bread and canned vegetables, and do all the normal things that children should learn from mothers and grandmothers. At night after Emma was asleep, Jim conducted surveillance. He borrowed Thomas's old Ford truck, less conspicuous than his own Dodge, parked across from Harper's Tavern, and watched. Made notes on who came and went, who stayed late, who left with Vincent. On the third night, he saw Frank Morris. Morris was 52, fat and balding, with the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of making bad choices and not caring about the consequences. He drove a black Chevrolet panel truck with Wyoming plates. He arrived at Harper's Tavern at 9 p.m. and stayed for 2 hours. When he left, Vincent walked him to the truck. They talked for 10 minutes. Vincent handed Morris an envelope. Morris counted what was inside, nodded, and drove away. Jim followed at a distance. Morris went to Pineview Trailer Park on the edge of town, parked in front of an Airstream trailer that had seen better days. Went inside and turned on the lights. Jim parked 100 yards away and watched. The next night he returned. This time he waited until Morris was good and drunk. The man had a pattern, started drinking around 7 p.m. bourbon from the empties piling up outside his door. By 9 p.m. he was usually talkative. By 10, he was too drunk to remember conversations the next morning. At 9:30, Jim knocked on the trailer door. Morris opened it, swaying slightly, bourbon smell rolling off him like fog. "Yeah," Morris slurred. "Frank Morris, name's Jim Collier. Heard you do transport work, looking to hire." Morris squinted at him. "What kind of transport?" "Private cargo. No questions type. Vincent Harper recommended you." The mention of Vincent's name worked like a password. Morris's suspicious expression cleared. Vincent sent you. Come in, come in. The trailer's interior was a disaster. Empty bottles, dirty clothes, the smell of old food and stale cigarette smoke. Morris gestured to a chair that looked like it might collapse if you sat on it too hard. Jim pulled out a $50 bill. Need something moved from here to Denver. Quiet like, can you handle that? Morris took the money, counted it twice. What's the cargo? Let's just say it's young and needs to disappear. Morris grinned. The grin was ugly. Done this before. Got a system. Drive to Rawlins, Wyoming. That's state line. Guy meets me there. Takes cargo rest away to Denver. Clean handoff. No trail back to Montana. How many times you done this? For Vincent, 8, maybe 9. Good money. 500 per cargo. What happens in Denver? Morris shrugged. Not my business. Clayton Ford takes over. Heard he sells to families, need workers, some other stuff. Don't ask, don't tell, you know. Jim's hands wanted to close around Morris's throat, wanted to squeeze until the man stopped breathing and stopped being able to hurt children. But violence would not help Emma, would not build a legal case, would not stop the network. So Jim kept his face neutral and his voice casual. Sounds efficient. How do you keep records? Got a ledger, dates, pickup locations, drop-off confirmations. Vincent's paranoid about double crosses, wants everything documented, so if anyone tries to screw him, he's got proof. Smart. That's Vincent, always thinking ahead. While Morris poured himself another bourbon, Jim glanced around the trailer. Spotted a ledger on the small table. Photographs pinned to a corkboard. Business cards. All the evidence you would need if you were building a federal case. I'll be in touch about that transport, Jim said, standing. Keep the 50 as a down payment. Anytime, friend. Vincent's people always welcome. Jim left, drove back to Mackenzie Ranch with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from rage, from having to sit across from a man who transported children like packages and talked about it like it was just another job. But he had what he needed. Confirmation that Vincent's operation was real. Confirmation that it crossed state lines. Confirmation that there were records. The next morning, Jim drove to the county seat in Helena, found the federal building, asked to speak with U.S. Marshal Edward Davis. The receptionist made a phone call. 10 minutes later, a man appeared in the lobby. Edward Davis was 48 with the kind of face that suggested he had seen too much and still chose to keep looking. He wore a suit that had seen better days and a shoulder holster that held a Colt 1911. He looked at Jim the way law enforcement looks at civilians who walk into federal buildings asking questions. You're Jim Collier, Davis said. I've heard about you. From who? From people in Silver Ridge. Small towns talk, especially when a Marine shows up and starts rattling Vincent Harper's cage. You know about Harper. I know about Clayton Ford. Been building a case against his network for 18 months. Harper's one of Ford's suppliers. Has been for years. They went to Davis's office. Third floor window overlooking Helena's Main Street walls covered in maps and photographs and evidence boards that told the story of 40 children sold across state lines. How many, Jim asked? That we can prove 43 kids in the last decade. That we suspect double that. Maybe more. Ford's careful, keeps multiple sets of books, hides behind legitimate placement services, makes everything look legal until you dig deep enough to find the bodies. Literal bodies. 3 that we know of. Kids who died in the homes he placed them in, abuse, neglect, accidents that maybe weren't accidents, rest are just gone. Disappeared into America like they never existed. Jim sat down, the chair creaked. What do you need to arrest them? Solid evidence, witnesses willing to testify, proof of conspiracy across state lines. Right now I've got pieces, bank records that show Ford paying Harper, transportation logs that show kids moving from Montana to Colorado. But I need someone to connect all the pieces, need someone inside the operation to talk. Frank Morris. Davis's eyebrows went up. You know Morris. Met him 2 nights ago. He's drunk sloppy and keeps records. Give me a week, I can get you his ledger. How? Better you don't know. Plausible deniability. Davis studied him for a long moment. You're not a cop. You're not law enforcement. Anything you obtain through illegal means I can't use in court. Then don't use it in court. Use it to find other evidence. Use it to know where to look. Use it to break this network before they sell another kid. Why are you doing all of this? You don't owe these kids anything. Jim thought about Chosen, about following orders, about 23 frozen Marines, about 5 years of running from the choice he had made. Because I owe myself, he said, because I need to prove I can be more than the man who walked away. Davis nodded slowly. There's a custody hearing December 9th. Vincent versus you for Emma Sullivan. You know Judge Preston is bought. I know. And you're fighting anyway. Yes. You might lose. Then I lose, but I'll lose fighting, not running. Davis pulled out a card, wrote a number on the back. This is my direct line. You get Morris's records, you call me, day or night, we'll make something happen. Jim took the card. What about Emma? If Vincent wins custody, what happens? I have federal jurisdiction if I can prove interstate trafficking conspiracy. The moment Vincent tries to move Emma across state lines, I can intervene. But that means letting him take custody first. Means using her as bait. No. Then you better win that custody hearing. Jim stood. I will. How you're a drifter with a week-old job. Vincent's got money connections, blood relation. The law's on his side. The law's on his side, but I've got something better. What's that? The truth. And people who are tired of pretending they don't see what Vincent is. Jim drove back to Silver Ridge. He had 9 days until the custody hearing. 9 days to build a case that would stand up in court. 9 days to prove that sometimes the right thing matters more than the legal thing. He spent those days working, building fences, training horses, becoming part of Mackenzie Ranch in ways that mattered, proving that he was not just passing through, that he could be relied on, that he was someone worth trusting. Emma grew stronger. The haunted look started to fade from her eyes. She laughed more, played with Martha's chickens, made friends at school. Slowly, carefully, she was learning that the world could be kind, that adults could keep promises, that waiting did not always end in abandonment. 1 week before the hearing, Jim returned to Morris's trailer. This time he did not knock. He waited until Morris left for Harper's Tavern. Then he picked the simple lock on the trailer door and went inside. The ledger was right where he remembered. On the table, names, dates, amounts paid, pickup locations, drop-off confirmations. 8 years of trafficking children documented in Frank Morris's sloppy handwriting. Jim photographed every page with a camera he had borrowed from Thomas. Then he put the ledger back exactly where he found it, left no sign he had been there, locked the door on his way out. 2 days later, he received a visit at the ranch. Bobby Miller showed up in an old Ford pickup, looking scared and determined in equal measure. 16 years old, tall, skinny, eyes that had seen too much. Mr. Collier, Bobby called. Jim was training Tempest in the corral. The mare had stopped trying to throw him. They had reached an understanding based on respect rather than dominance. That's me. I'm Bobby Miller. My sister Amy disappeared 2 years ago. Vincent Harper took custody after our parents died. Jim climbed off the horse, walked over to the fence. I've heard about Amy. I'm sorry. I saw her 6 months ago in Salt Lake City. I was hitchhiking trying to find her. She was with a man. He was hurting her, I could tell. When I called her name, he dragged her away. I tried to follow, but lost them. Bobby's voice was shaking. I went to police. They didn't care. Said kids run away all the time. Said maybe I was mistaken. You weren't mistaken. No, I know my sister. Bobby pulled an envelope from his jacket. I've been saving every dollar from my job at Tucker's. $743. It's yours if you can stop Vincent from taking Emma. If you can make him pay for what he did to Amy. Jim looked at the envelope. At this kid who had lost his sister and was trying to buy justice because he did not know any other way to get it. Keep your money, Bobby. But I want to help. Then testify at the custody hearing. Tell Judge Preston what you told me about Amy, about what Vincent does, about how the system failed you. He won't listen. Judge Preston owes Vincent money. Maybe, but there's going to be reporters there. People from Helena, U.S. Marshal watching from the back. When you tell your story in public, Preston can't pretend he doesn't hear it. Can't rule for Vincent without everyone knowing he's corrupt. Bobby thought about that. What if Vincent comes after me? He might, but by then Marshall Davis will have enough evidence to arrest him. Vincent's time is running out. He just doesn't know it yet. Bobby nodded slowly. Okay, I'll testify. For Amy. For Amy, Jim agreed. 5 days before the hearing, Vincent made one final play. It was 3 in the morning when Jim woke to the sound of breaking glass. He was out of bed in seconds, pulling on pants, grabbing the rifle he kept by the door. The sound had come from the main house. Emma. Jim ran across the dark yard in his bare feet. The front door of the main house was open. Inside, Martha was shouting. Thomas was already downstairs in his nightshirt, shotgun in hand. Emma's room, Thomas said. Window's broken. She's gone. Jim ran to Emma's room. Cold air poured through the shattered window. On the pillow, a note in handwriting that was not Emma's. Stop fighting or you'll never see her again. Jim's hands shook as he read it. Then he was moving, grabbing his boots, his coat. Outside, he could see tracks in the fresh snow. 2 sets, one small being dragged, one larger man's boots, leading toward the road. Thomas appeared beside him. I'm calling the sheriff. Sheriff works for Vincent. Call Marshall Davis. Jim was already following the tracks. And tell him Vincent just made his biggest mistake. The tracks led half a mile to where Highway 12 cut through Mackenzie property. They're tire tracks. A vehicle had been waiting. Jim could see where Emma had struggled, where she'd been forced into the truck. Black Chevrolet panel truck. Wyoming plates. Frank Morris. Jim ran back to the ranch, jumped in his Dodge, and tore onto the highway heading north. Toward Rawlins. Toward the Wyoming border. Toward where Morris always made his handoffs. He pushed the truck to 70 miles per hour on roads that were not meant for that kind of speed in winter. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn coming. Time running out. 30 miles north of Silver Ridge, Jim saw taillights. Black Chevrolet panel truck. He closed the distance, pulled alongside. Could see Morris behind the wheel. Could see someone in the passenger seat. Another man. Hired muscle. Jim swerved his truck in front of the Chevrolet. Hit the brakes. The panel truck had to swerve to avoid him, fishtailed on the icy road, slid into the ditch. Jim was out of his truck before it fully stopped, rifle in hand. The panel truck's doors opened. Morris stumbled out, drunk even at 4 in the morning. The other man came out the passenger side, big, armed. Bad idea, friend, the big man said, hand moving toward his coat. Draw that gun and you're dead, Jim said. His voice was marine flat, combat calm, the voice of someone who had killed before and would do it again without hesitation. The big man saw something in Jim's eyes and reconsidered. Morris, Jim said, open the back. I don't know what you're talking about. Jim fired once. The bullet kicked up dirt 6 inches from Morris's foot. Morris yelped, next one goes through your knee. Open the back. Morris stumbled to the rear of the truck. Opened the doors. Inside Emma, hands bound with rope. Duct tape over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. Jim moved, not thinking, pure instinct. Pulled Emma out of the truck, cut her bonds with his pocket knife, removed the tape as gently as he could. It's me, he said. You're safe. I've got you. Emma threw her arms around his neck, shaking, not crying, too scared to cry. Behind them, the sound of vehicles approaching. Marshall Davis and 2 state police cars. Davis must have been closer than Helena when Thomas called. Davis and his deputies took over, handcuffed Morris and the hired muscle. Davis looked at Jim. You just saved me a lot of paperwork, Davis said. Morris transporting a minor across state lines. Kidnapping, that's federal. That's what I've been waiting for. Vincent ordered it, Jim said. I know. Morris is already talking, trying to cut a deal. Davis looked at Emma, still clinging to Jim. Get her home, get warm. I'll need statements later, but right now she needs to feel safe. Jim carried Emma back to his truck, wrapped her in his coat, drove back to Mackenzie Ranch as the sun came up over the Rockies. Martha was waiting. She took Emma inside, made hot chocolate, sat with her while she finally cried. All the fear coming out in waves. Jim sat on the porch with Thomas. Vincent's done, Thomas said. Attempted kidnapping. Morris will testify to save himself. Federal charges, it's over. Not until the custody hearing, Jim said. Not until a judge says Emma's mine. After this, no judge in Montana would give Vincent custody. We'll see. The night before the custody hearing, Jim could not sleep. He sat on the porch of his cabin, smoking a cigarette, watching the stars. In the main house, Emma was sleeping. Safe, warm, unaware that tomorrow everything would be decided. Thomas appeared out of the darkness, sat down beside him. "You ready?" Thomas asked. "No, but I'm going anyway." That's what courage is. Doing the thing that scares you because it needs doing. They sat in silence for a while. Then Thomas said, "My son died at Bastogne. He was 22. I got a letter from his commanding officer. Said my boy stood his ground when he could have retreated. Said he saved a dozen men by holding position. Said he was a hero." Thomas's voice cracked. "But I would have traded his heroism for having him home, for seeing him grow old, for grandchildren. Heroes make me angry, Jim, because we build monuments to them instead of asking why they had to die in the first place." "I'm not a hero," Jim said. "No, you're something better. You're a man who's trying to do right by a little girl who needs you. That might not get monuments, but it matters more." Jim crushed out his cigarette. "What if I lose tomorrow? Then we appeal. We fight harder. We find another way. And if there is no other way—" Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then you'll have tried, and trying matters. Emma will know that someone cared enough to fight for her, or that's more than most kids get." Jim went inside, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling, thought about tomorrow, about facing Vincent Harper in court, about Emma's future hanging in the balance, about 23 Marines frozen in Korea, and whether any amount of good deeds could ever balance that ledger. He did not sleep. But when the sun came up and it was time to fight, he was ready. December 9th, 1955, the day of reckoning. The county courthouse sat on a hill overlooking Silver Ridge like a judge looking down on defendants. Built from Montana granite in 1923, it had witnessed 32 years of divorces and land disputes and petty crimes. But it had never witnessed anything like this. The courtroom was packed. Jim arrived at 0800 hours with Emma. She wore a blue dress that Martha had made for her red hair brushed and held back with a ribbon. She looked small walking up those courthouse steps. Fragile. But she walked with her head up, holding Jim's hand like it was an anchor in a storm. Vincent Harper stood at the top of the steps waiting. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, with subtle pinstripes. His lawyer stood beside him. Howard Green from Denver, 50 years old, with a reputation for winning cases that should have been unwinnable. He charged $500 a day and was worth every penny to men who could afford him. "Mr. Collier," Vincent said. His voice was smooth, friendly, the voice of a man who knew he had already won. "I hope we can keep this civil, for Emma's sake." Jim did not respond, just walked past, keeping himself between Vincent and Emma. Inside the courtroom smelled of old wood and older secrets. The walls were paneled in dark oak. The windows let in weak December sunlight that did little to warm the space. Rows of wooden benches stretched back from the judge's bench, and those benches were filling fast. Roy Hastings sat in the front row, his bad legs stretched out into the aisle. Beside him, Martha and Thomas Mackenzie, Doc Pierce, Reverend Matthew Clark from the Methodist Church, Sarah Bennett, the school teacher, Bobby Miller in the back looking scared but determined, and in the very last row, trying to be inconspicuous, U.S. Marshal Edward Davis. He wore civilian clothes. No badge visible, just another face in the crowd. But Jim knew he was there, knew he was watching, knew that whatever happened in this courtroom would have consequences beyond these walls. There were reporters too, 3 of them from Helena notebooks ready. One from the Montana Standard out of Butte. Margaret Flynn, the lawyer representing Jim pro bono, had done her job. She had made this public, made it impossible for Judge Preston to rule quietly in Vincent's favor without everyone knowing he was bought. Margaret sat at the defense table, 52 years old, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing the same no-nonsense expression she wore when she had integrated the Montana Bar Association back in '48 over the objections of men who thought women had no place practicing law. She had won that fight. She planned to win this one. Judge Harrison Preston entered at 0900 hours exactly. 62 years old, thinning hair, a face that suggested he had spent 30 years on the bench making comfortable decisions that kept powerful people happy and his own life uncomplicated. He had been a decent judge once or so, people said, before the gambling debts, before Vincent Harper offered to make those debts disappear in exchange for occasional favors. "All rise," the bailiff called. Everyone stood. Judge Preston took his seat, adjusted his glasses, looked out over a courtroom more crowded than he had expected. His expression flickered. Uncertainty. Like a man realizing that the script he had been given might not work with this many witnesses watching. "Be seated," Preston said. "This is a custody hearing for Emma Marie Sullivan, age 6. Mr. Vincent Harper petitions for guardianship as next of kin. Mr. James Collier contests. Mr. Green, you may present your case." Howard Green stood. He moved like a man comfortable in courtrooms. This was his territory, his arena. He had fought 100 battles here and won 95 of them. "Your Honor," Green began, "this is a straightforward matter. Vincent Harper is Emma Sullivan's great-uncle, her only surviving blood relative. He has the means to provide for her. He owns successful businesses in Silver Ridge. He has a home, financial stability, and the legal standing that comes from family ties." Green walked to the center of the courtroom. His voice was measured, reasonable. The voice of someone explaining simple facts to people who were making things unnecessarily complicated. Mr. Collier, by contrast, is a stranger. He arrived in Silver Ridge less than 3 weeks ago. He works as a ranch hand, an honest living, certainly, but hardly the foundation for raising a child. He has no family here, no long-term ties to this community, no legal relationship to Emma whatsoever. Green paused, let that sink in. Then he went for the throat. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Collier has a troubled military history. He served with distinction in Korea, true, but military records show that 23 Marines under his command died at Chosin Reservoir. 23 men who trusted him to keep them safe. Mr. Collier followed orders to retreat, leaving those wounded men behind." The courtroom went quiet. Even the reporters stopped writing. "Can we trust a man who abandoned dying Marines," Green asked, "to care for a vulnerable 6-year-old child?" Margaret Flynn shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Green is distorting military records and misrepresenting combat decisions made under extreme circumstances. Staff Sergeant Collier received the Silver Star for his actions at Chosin. His citation specifically commends him for holding position long enough to save hundreds of lives." Judge Preston looked uncomfortable. "Sustained. Mr. Green, let's keep this relevant to custody matters." "Of course, Your Honor." Green smiled. "The relevant matter is simple. Vincent Harper is family. James Collier is a stranger with a questionable past. Montana law clearly favors blood relations in custody disputes. I move that you grant custody to Mr. Harper immediately." Green sat down, confident, satisfied. He had laid out the legal framework and the emotional appeal. In his experience, that was usually enough. Margaret stood. She did not walk to the center of the courtroom. She stayed at the table, one hand on Jim's shoulder, the other resting near where Emma sat between them. "Your Honor," Margaret said, "Mr. Green is correct about one thing. Montana law does favor blood relations, but the law also requires courts to consider the best interests of the child. So let's talk about what's in Emma's best interest." She gestured to Doc Pierce. "I called Dr. Raymond Pierce to testify." Doc walked to the witness stand, took the oath, sat down with the careful movements of a man whose body had seen 61 years of hard use. "Dr. Pierce," Margaret said, "when did you first examine Emma Sullivan?" "November 18th, the day after Mr. Collier brought her into Roy's diner." "Describe her condition." Doc's expression hardened. Severe malnutrition. She had lost approximately 10 pounds over 18 days. Dehydration causing cracked lips and bleeding. Early-stage hypothermia. Bruising on her arms and legs from exposure. In my medical opinion, another 48 hours and she would have died. Someone in the courtroom gasped. Margaret let the words hang in the air. "How long had Emma been in that condition?" Margaret asked. "Based on the degree of physical deterioration, I would estimate minimum 2 weeks, possibly longer." "And during those 2 weeks, where was Vincent Harper?" Doc looked directly at Vincent, 300 feet away, running his tavern. He could see Emma from his window. The entire town could see her. "Did Mr. Harper know Emma was his relative during this time?" "Patrick Sullivan was his nephew. Mr. Harper knew Patrick died in the mine collapse November 1st. He collected $500 in insurance money as next of kin. So yes, he knew Emma was his family, knew she was sitting on those steps, knew her father was dead. and he did nothing. Green stood. Objection. Speculation about Mr. Harper's knowledge and intentions. Overruled, Preston said quietly. Dr. Pierce is stating facts about what Mr. Harper knew and when he knew it. Continue. Margaret smiled. Dr. Pierce, have you observed Emma's condition since Mr. Collier took responsibility for her? Yes, she's gained back the weight she lost, plus 3 additional pounds. The physical signs of malnutrition and exposure are gone. She's sleeping well, eating normally, attending school. By every medical measure, she is thriving. In your professional opinion, who has provided better care for Emma, her blood relative or this stranger? Doc did not hesitate. James Collier has provided excellent care. Emma is healthy, happy, and safe. That's what matters. Green stood for cross-examination. Dr. Pierce, you're friends with Mr. Collier, are you not? I know him. I wouldn't say friends. You've been helping him build his case against Mr. Harper, providing information, making introductions, acting as a character witness. Sounds like friendship to me. It's not friendship. It's doing the right thing. There's a difference. Green smiled. Of course. No further questions. Margaret called Roy Hastings next. Roy limped to the witness stand, his prosthetic leg making a hollow sound on the wooden floor. He took the oath and sat down looking uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Hastings, Margaret said, you're a Korean War veteran, correct? Yes, ma'am. 7th Infantry Division. Lost my leg at Incheon in '50. You've observed Mr. Collier's interactions with Emma over the past 3 weeks. What have you seen? Roy thought for a moment. I've seen a man treating a child with respect and patience, teaching her that adults can be trusted, that the world isn't all cold and hunger and waiting for people who never come back. I've seen Emma go from dead-eyed and starving to laughing and playing like a normal kid. That's good fathering in my book. Thank you. No further questions. Green approached for cross-examination. Mr. Hastings, you run a diner. You're not an expert in child development or psychology, correct? No, sir, but I know the difference between a scared kid and a happy one. Don't need a degree for that. And you're also a fellow veteran. You served in Korea. Mr. Collier served in Korea. There's a natural kinship there, isn't there? A desire to help a brother in arms, even if that help involves bending the truth. Roy's face went hard. I don't bend the truth, and I don't help people because they're veterans. I help them because they're doing right by a kid who needs it. Of course, no further questions. Margaret called Reverend Clark, then Martha Mackenzie, then Sarah Bennett. Each one testified to the same thing. Emma was thriving under Jim's care. She was healthy, happy, attending school, making friends. She was becoming a normal child again. And each time Green cross-examined, he hammered the same point. These were Jim's friends, his allies, people with reasons to want him to win. Their testimony was biased. Judge Preston listened to it all with an expression that suggested he wished he were anywhere else. The courtroom was too full, too many eyes watching, too many reporters taking notes. He could not make the ruling Vincent wanted without it being obvious what he was doing. But he could not rule against Vincent without consequences either. Margaret stood. Your Honor, I call Vincent Harper to the stand. The courtroom went silent. Green was on his feet immediately. Objection. Mr. Harper is not required to testify. This is a custody hearing, not a criminal trial. Mr. Harper has made claims about his fitness as a guardian, Margaret said. I have the right to question those claims. Preston hesitated, then nodded. Overruled. Mr. Harper, please take the stand. Vincent stood, smiled, walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had prepared for this. He took the oath and sat down, crossing his legs casually. Comfortable. In control. Mr. Harper, Margaret began, when did you learn that Patrick Sullivan had died November 1st, the day of the mine collapse? And when did you learn that Emma was waiting outside Tucker's general store? I'm not sure of the exact date. Within a few days, I believe. Within a few days, so by November 4th or 5th, you knew your nephew was dead and his 6-year-old daughter was alone. I knew Emma was at the store, yes. And you did nothing. Vincent's expression remained calm. I was giving her time to process her grief. I didn't want to overwhelm her by swooping in immediately. I thought it would be better to let her come to terms with her father's death naturally, by letting her starve. I provided food. I asked townspeople to look after her. I was monitoring the situation. For 18 days. Child psychology experts recommend allowing children space to grieve in their own way. Margaret walked to her table, picked up a document. Mr. Harper, in the past 8 years, how many orphan children have been in your temporary custody? Green stood. Objection, irrelevant to the current case. It's relevant to establishing a pattern of behavior, Your Honor. Preston looked between them. The courtroom was watching. The reporters were writing. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Harper. Vincent's smile tightened slightly. 4 or 5, I don't recall exactly. Let me help you recall. Sarah Chen in 1947, Tommy Walsh in 49, Maria Santos in 52, Amy Miller in 54. 4 children. Where are they now? Placed with families, foster homes, relatives. Can you provide contact information for any of these families? I don't have that information readily available. Convenient. Margaret walked closer to the witness stand. Did you receive any money for placing these children? I was reimbursed for expenses, housing, food, transportation. Standard practice. How much? I don't recall specific amounts. Frank Morris recalls. He transported children for you to Wyoming, where they were handed off to a man named Clayton Ford in Denver. $500 per child. Does that help your memory? The courtroom erupted, people whispering, the reporters scribbling furiously. Green was on his feet. Objection. This is outrageous. Mr. Morris is a known alcoholic with no credibility. Ms. Flynn is making wild accusations with no evidence. I have evidence, Margaret said calmly. She held up photographs, transportation records, bank statements showing payments from Clayton Ford to Vincent Harper, ledgers documenting 8 years of child trafficking across state lines. Judge Preston's face went pale. Where did you obtain these documents? Through legal investigation, Your Honor. And I've provided copies to the U.S. Marshal's Office for federal review. In the back row, Marshal Davis stood up. Every eye turned to him. Your Honor, Davis said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. I'm U.S. Marshal Edward Davis, Denver office. I've been investigating Clayton Ford and his trafficking network for 18 months. Mr. Harper is one of several suppliers we've identified. While this custody hearing is a state matter, I want to inform the court that Mr. Harper will face federal charges regardless of today's ruling. Vincent's composure cracked. He leaned toward Green, whispering urgently. Judge Preston looked like a man who had just realized the comfortable corruption he had lived with for years was about to destroy him. Marshal Davis, are you saying Mr. Harper is under federal investigation? Yes, Your Honor, for human trafficking, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of minors for illegal purposes. Preston turned to Vincent. Mr. Harper, do you wish to continue your petition for custody? Vincent stood. The charm was gone now. What replaced it was cold fury. This is a setup, a conspiracy between Collier, that Marine who abandoned his men in Korea, and federal authorities looking to justify their failed investigation. Mr. Harper, sit down, Preston said. I have rights. I'm Emma's family. The law says blood relations take precedence. The law also says I have discretion to rule in the best interests of the child. And right now, those interests are looking very different than they did this morning. Margaret played her final card. Your Honor, I call Emma Sullivan to testify. The courtroom went completely silent. Green objected. Your Honor, the child is 6 years old. She cannot possibly understand the implications of this hearing. She's old enough to have a voice, Margaret said. Montana law allows children over 5 to express preferences in custody matters. I want Emma to tell the court what she wants. Preston looked at Emma. The little girl sat between Jim and Martha, small and scared but not hiding. Her blue eyes met the judge's gaze without flinching. Emma, Preston said gently, would you like to come up here and talk to me? Emma looked at Jim. He nodded. It's okay, sweetheart. Just tell the truth. Emma stood, walked to the witness stand. She was so small that the bailiff had to help her into the chair. Her feet dangled above the floor. She looked out at the courtroom full of adults and found Jim's face in the crowd. Emma, Judge Preston said, do you know why we're here today? Yes, sir, you're deciding who I live with. That's right, and I need to ask you some questions. Can you be brave? Emma nodded. Do you want to live with your Uncle Vincent? Emma's voice was clear. Strong. No, sir. Why not buy? Because he let me wait on those steps for 18 days even though he knew Papa was dead. He watched me get hungry and cold and he never helped. Not once. Vincent stood up. That's a lie. I was trying to help. Mr. Harper, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt, Preston snapped. Emma continued as if Vincent had not spoken. Uncle Vincent scared me. When his men took me from the ranch that night, they said Uncle Vincent paid them. Said he wanted me gone before the hearing. They were taking me to Wyoming. What men? Preston asked. Frank Morris and another man. Jim stopped them. Saved me. Green stood. Your Honor, there was an alleged incident, but no charges were filed. Mr. Harper was never implicated. Marshal Davis spoke from the back. Actually, Mr. Morris is in federal custody. He's provided a sworn statement implicating Mr. Harper in kidnapping, conspiracy, and attempted trafficking. We arrested him 3 days ago. The courtroom exploded, everyone talking at once, reporters rushing for the doors to file their stories, Preston banging his gavel for order. When the noise died down, Preston turned back to Emma. Mom, you say you don't want to live with your uncle. Where do you want to live? With Jim. With Dad. The word hung in the air. Dad. Not Mr. Collier. Not Jim. Dad. Why? Preston asked gently. Emma thought about her answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the wisdom of someone far older than 6. Papa used to say, you don't measure people by how long you've known them. You measure them by what they do when things are hard. Uncle Vincent did the easy thing. He walked past. Jim did the hard thing. He chose not to walk past. And he's been there every day since, helping me, making sure I'm safe, being my family when I didn't have any. She looked directly at Judge Preston. I trust Jim. I don't trust Uncle Vincent. And Papa said trust matters more than blood. Preston was quiet for a long time. Then he said, thank you, Emma. You can go back to your seat. Emma climbed down from the witness stand, walked back to Jim. He pulled her close and she buried her face in his jacket. Preston looked at Vincent, looked at Jim, looked at the packed courtroom and the reporters, and Marshal Davis standing in the back like justice personified. I need 15 minutes to review the testimony and evidence, Preston said. Court is in recess. Everyone stood as Preston left. The courtroom erupted in conversation. Vincent was conferring urgently with Green. Jim sat with his arm around Emma, not speaking, just holding her. Marshal Davis approached. Whatever Preston rules Vincent's done, we have enough to arrest him today on federal charges. Morris's testimony, the ledger's bank records. Ford is cooperating too, trying to reduce his sentence. The whole network is coming down. What about the other children? Jim asked. We've located most of them, some dead, most alive but traumatized. We're working on placements, therapy, reunification where possible. It's going to take years to clean up this mess, but they'll be safe. They'll be safer. That's the best I can promise. 15 minutes later, Preston returned. The courtroom fell silent. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented today, Preston began. His voice was heavy, like a man carrying weight he had avoided for too long. This has been an unusual case. Mr. Harper has legal standing as blood relative, but the evidence suggests he neglected his duty to Emma for 18 days, possibly with the intention of making her desperate enough to accept any offer of help. Vincent's face was stone. The evidence also suggests a pattern of behavior with other orphaned children that raises serious concerns about Mr. Harper's fitness as a guardian. While some of this evidence may be circumstantial, the federal investigation adds weight to these concerns. Preston looked at Emma, then at Jim. Mr. Collier, you have no blood relation to Emma. You've only known her for 3 weeks. By traditional standards, you should not be considered a suitable guardian. Jim felt Emma's hand tighten on his. But the evidence shows you've provided excellent care. Emma is healthy, happy, and thriving. Multiple witnesses have testified to your character and commitment, and Emma herself has expressed a clear preference to remain in your care. Preston paused. The courtroom held its breath. Montana law requires me to act in the best interests of the child. After careful consideration, I grant temporary custody of Emma Sullivan to James Collier pending full review in 6 months. Mr. Harper's petition is denied. The courtroom exploded, cheering from some corners, shocked silence from others, reporters bolting for phones. Vincent stood, his face contorted with rage. "This is illegal. I'll appeal. I'll take this to the state Supreme Court." Marshal Davis and two deputies moved forward. "Vincent Harper, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, human trafficking, and interstate transportation of minors for illegal purposes." They handcuffed Vincent while he shouted about his rights and his lawyers and how this was all a conspiracy. They let him out through a side door while reporters shouted questions. Emma threw her arms around Jim. We won, sweetheart." "You're really my dad now," Jim's throat tightened. "Temporary. We have another hearing in 6 months to make it permanent. But yes, I'm your dad." Emma hugged him tighter. Jim held her and felt something he had not felt in 5 years. Something that might have been peace, though he barely recognized it after so long in the dark. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Jim pushed through, keeping Emma close, saying nothing. Roy and Thomas ran interference, creating a path to the truck. They drove back to Mackenzie Ranch in silence. Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Jim carried her into the main house where Martha was waiting with hot chocolate and cookies and all the normal things that made life worth living. That night, after Emma was asleep and the adrenaline had faded, Jim sat on the porch of his cabin and let himself breathe. Thomas appeared out of the darkness, sat down without speaking. They watched the stars for a while. "You did it," Thomas finally said. "We did it. Couldn't have won without you, Martha, Roy, Doc, everyone who stood up. But you started it. You chose not to walk past when everyone else did. Didn't feel like a choice at the time. Felt like the only thing I could do. That's what makes it matter." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Thomas said, "You know, this is just the beginning, right? Raising a kid, especially one who's been through what Emma's been through. It's going to be hard. She'll have nightmares, trust issues, days when she pushes you away because she's scared you'll leave." "I know. And you're staying anyway." "I'm staying," Thomas stood, clapped Jim on the shoulder. "Good, because Martha's already planning Emma's birthday party for next month. She's invested now." Jim smiled. "Tell her thank you. Tell her yourself. You're family now." After Thomas left, Jim sat alone with the stars and the silence and the weight of responsibility that felt nothing like the burden he had been carrying for 5 years. This weight was different. This weight was chosen. This weight meant something. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Jim worked the ranch. Emma went to school. They ate dinner together every night, Martha insisting they join her and Thomas in the main house because families should eat together. Emma did homework at the kitchen table while Jim reviewed ranch accounts. And Thomas told stories about the old days when Montana was wilder and life was harder, but somehow simpler. Emma had nightmares. 3 or 4 times a week, she would wake up crying, dreaming about her father or the cold steps or Uncle Vincent. Each time Jim was there, he would sit on the edge of her bed and tell her she was safe, that she was home, that he was not leaving. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. Christmas came. Martha bought Emma a doll and new clothes. Thomas gave her a pony named Buttercup. Jim built her a sled and taught her how to navigate the slopes behind the ranch without breaking her neck. They cut down a pine tree together and decorated it with strings of popcorn and homemade ornaments. On Christmas morning, Emma gave Jim a drawing. It showed 2 figures, one tall and one small, holding hands in front of a cabin. Above them, she had written in careful letters, "My family." Jim hung it on the cabin wall where he could see it every morning when he woke up. Vincent Harper went to trial in February. Federal court in Helena. The proceedings took 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Morris's testimony, the ledgers, bank records, testimony from parents who had bought children from Ford not knowing or not caring where they came from. Ford took a plea deal, 20 years in federal prison in exchange for testifying against his network. Vincent refused to deal, insisted on his innocence, claimed he was being railroaded by a conspiracy of jealous competitors and federal overreach. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15. When the sentence was read, Vincent looked across the courtroom at Jim and Emma. His expression promised that this was not over, that he would find a way to hurt them, that men like him always found a way. But Marshal Davis was there, and Thomas Mackenzie, and Roy Hastings, and a dozen other people from Silver Ridge who had finally found the courage to stand against a man who had terrorized their town for 8 years. Vincent was led away in chains, and Silver Ridge began the slow process of healing. Sheriff Tom Hendricks resigned, left Montana in the middle of the night running from the guilt that had been eating him alive since his wife died 5 years before. The state appointed a new sheriff, a man named Jack Porter, who had no connections to Vincent and no interest in looking the other way. Judge Preston retired. The Montana Bar Association investigated his financial dealings with Vincent. Nothing criminal was proven, but the shame was enough. He sold his house and moved to California to live with his daughter, leaving behind a career tarnished by the choices he had made when courage mattered more than comfort. In June, exactly 6 months after the temporary custody ruling, Jim and Emma returned to court. This time there was no drama, no packed courtroom, no reporters, just a new judge reviewing reports from the state social services office, from Emma's school, from Doc Pierce's medical examinations, from character witnesses, who all said the same thing: Emma was thriving. The judge was a woman named Catherine Morrison, 50 years old, with a reputation for putting children's welfare above legal technicalities. She spent 10 minutes reading the file. Then she looked at Jim and Emma. "Mr. Collier," Judge Morrison said, "the reports are exemplary. Emma is healthy, doing well in school, well-adjusted socially. You've provided a stable home and excellent care." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Emma, do you still want Mr. Collier to be your guardian?" Emma nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma'am, he's my dad." Morrison smiled. "Then I see no reason to delay. I hereby grant full and permanent custody of Emma Sullivan to James Collier. She is now legally your daughter, Mr. Collier. Congratulations." She stamped the papers. Made it official. Made it real. Outside the courthouse, Emma looked up at Jim. "Can I call you Dad now? Like officially?" "You've been calling me Dad for months." "I know, but now it's legal. Now nobody can take me away." "Nobody could take you away before, but yes, it's legal now. I'm officially your dad." Emma threw her arms around his waist. "I love you, Dad." Jim knelt down so he was eye level with her. "I love you too, Emma. More than I ever thought I could love anything after Korea. You gave me a reason to stop running, to stand still, to be someone worth being. You were always worth being. You just didn't know it yet." Out of the mouths of children, Jim thawed, truth that adults spend lifetimes avoiding. They drove back to the ranch. Life continued. Summer turned to fall. Fall turned to winter again. Emma turned 7, then 8, then 9. Jim kept working for Thomas until the old man's heart gave out one morning in January of '58. Thomas died the way he had lived, with dignity and on his own land, with Martha holding his hand and telling him he had been a good man. At the funeral, Martha pulled Jim aside. "Thomas wanted you to have the ranch. It's in his will. He said you'd earned it. Said you were the son he never got to see grow old." Jim tried to refuse. It was too much. He was just the foreman. But Martha insisted. "Don't disrespect his wishes. He knew what he was doing. The ranch needs someone who'll care for it. Someone who'll stay. That's you." So Jim became a rancher. Mackenzie Ranch became Collier Ranch, though everyone in town still called it by its old name, out of respect for Thomas's memory. Martha lived in the main house until she died peacefully in her sleep in '61. She left everything to Jim and Emma, saying they were the grandchildren she had always wanted. The years passed. Emma grew from a frightened 6-year-old into a confident young woman. She excelled in school, made friends, learned to ride and rope, and do all the things ranch kids do. But she never forgot where she came from, never forgot the 18 days on cold steps, or the uncle who tried to sell her, or the father who chose not to walk past. In high school, she wrote an essay about human trafficking for a civics class. It won a state competition. The prize was a scholarship to the University of Montana. She decided to study social work. "I want to help kids like me," she told Jim when she was 17 and filling out college applications. "Kids nobody wants. Kids who are waiting for someone to care." Jim felt pride swell in his chest. "Your papa would be proud. I'm proud. Will you be okay if I go away to college? I know the ranch needs help." "The ranch will be fine. You go save the world. That's more important." In September of '62, Jim drove Emma to Missoula for her first year of college. They loaded her things into the dorm room. Jim met her roommate, a girl from Billings who seemed nice enough. They had lunch at a diner near campus. "You going to be okay?" Jim asked. "I'm going to miss you." Miss the ranch, miss home, but I'm ready. Call if you need anything. Anything at all. I will. Emma paused. Dad, thank you. For what? For choosing not to walk past, for staying, for being my father when you didn't have to be. Being your father has been the greatest honor of my life, Emma. Don't thank me for that. They hugged. Jim drove back to Silver Ridge with an empty passenger seat and a heart that was full and breaking in equal measure. This was what raising children meant. Loving them enough to let them go. Trusting that you had given them what they needed to navigate the world alone. Emma thrived at university, made the dean's list, joined organizations that advocated for child welfare, interned at social services offices in the summers. She was building towards something, building toward a life that mattered. And then in May of 1964, she came home with news. Jim was working on the north fence when he saw her truck coming up the ranch road. She was not supposed to be home until June. He felt a flash of worry, something wrong, an emergency. Emma jumped out of the truck, grinning. Dad, I've got news. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I met someone. Jim's heart sank. Of course. She was 19, beautiful, smart. Of course there was someone. Emma laughed at his expression. Not like that. Well, not romantically. A woman came to speak at our social work program. Her name is Sarah Chen. The name hit Jim like a physical blow. Sarah Chen, 9 years old and 47, sold by Vincent Harper, last seen in a brothel in Spokane. She's alive, Jim asked. She's alive. She's 26 now, a social worker in Seattle. She survived Dad. She got out, and she wants to meet you. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen drove to Silver Ridge. Jim and Emma waited outside the ranch house. A car appeared on the horizon. A Ford Fairlane, blue and white, looking new and clean, and nothing like the broken child Jim had imagined all these years. The car stopped. The driver's door opened. Sarah Chen stepped out. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a professional style. She wore a simple dress and a cardigan. She looked healthy, whole, like someone who had survived hell and chosen to live anyway. She walked toward Jim, stopped a few feet away. For a moment, they just looked at each other. This woman who had been a casualty of Vincent Harper's evil. This man who had finally broken the network that destroyed so many lives. Mr. Collier, Sarah said, I've wanted to meet you for a long time. Call me Jim, and I'm glad you're here. Glad you're alive. Glad you made it. I almost didn't. After Spokane, I was moved 3 more times. Worse places each time. But in '57, there was a raid. Federal authorities. They found 12 of us. Marshall Davis was there. He remembered your case, connected me back to Silver Ridge, back to Vincent Harper. She paused. By the time they found me, I didn't remember my own name, didn't remember anything before the houses. But Marshall Davis helped me piece it together, helped me understand I wasn't garbage. I was a victim, and victims can become survivors. What happened after the raid, Emma asked. Foster family in Seattle. Good people. They helped me heal, paid for therapy, education. I got my GED, then college, then my social work degree. I became a caseworker so I could help kids like me. How many have you helped? Jim asked. Sarah smiled. In 7 years, maybe 100 kids through the system. Some I could save, some I couldn't. But I keep trying, because someone chose to act when it mattered. And that choice started a chain reaction that eventually saved me. They went inside, sat around the kitchen table. Sarah told her story, the years of abuse, the slow process of healing, the moment she decided to turn her pain into purpose. There are others, Sarah said, other survivors from Vincent's network, from Ford's network, 43 children that we know about. Most are adults now, some dead, some too damaged to function. But some of us survived, and we found each other. How, Emma asked. Marshall Davis connected us, started a support group in '59. We meet in Denver twice a year, share stories, help each other heal, remember the ones who didn't make it. She pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs, faces, names, stories. Tommy Walsh, Sarah said, pointing to a photo of a young man in his 20s, working construction in Nevada, struggles with addiction, but he's fighting it. Maria Santos, married 2 kids living in California. Bobby Miller's sister, Amy. She's a teacher now, helping other kids. She showed them more faces, more stories. 43 children scattered across the western United States, some thriving, some barely surviving, all connected by shared trauma and the fact that one man had finally acted when it mattered. We call ourselves the 43, Sarah said, and we're starting a foundation to prevent what happened to us from happening to others, to support trafficking survivors, to fund investigations and prosecutions, to make sure Vincent Harper's name becomes synonymous with failure instead of fear. What can I do to help? Jim asked. Sarah looked at him. We want to name it after you, the Collier Foundation for Child Welfare, because you're the one who chose not to walk past, who fought, who proved that one person caring can change everything. Jim shook his head. No, don't name it after me. I didn't save anyone. I just didn't walk past one little girl. Exactly, Sarah said. You didn't walk past. That's what we need more of. People who don't walk past. Emma spoke up. What about calling it the stopping place? Because that's what it is. A place where people stop, where they see suffering and choose to act, where they become the ones who don't walk past. Sarah considered that, then she smiled. The stopping place. I like it. It's not about one person being a hero, it's about all of us choosing to act, choosing to see, choosing to care. They talked for hours about the foundation, about the work still to be done, about the children still trapped in networks across America, about how 43 survivors were going to fight back by helping others escape. Before Sarah left, she hugged Jim. Thank you. For Emma, for me, for all of us. You didn't just save one little girl. You saved us all. Jim watched her drive away, watched the dust settle on the road, turned to Emma. You know what this means, right? Emma said. The stopping place is going to need people who understand trauma, who can connect with survivors, who know what it's like to wait and hope and almost give up. You're joining them. After graduation, yes, I want to help build this. Want to make sure no other kid sits on cold steps waiting for someone who'll never come. Jim felt his throat tighten. Your papa would be so proud. I'm so proud. You taught me this. You taught me that caring enough to act matters, that one person choosing to see can change the world. You're going to change it more than I ever could. No, Dad, we're going to change it together. 8 years after Jim chose not to walk past a little girl on cold steps in Montana, the stopping place opened its first office in Denver. The board of directors included Sarah Chen, Emma Collier, Marshal Edward Davis, and representatives from 12 states. Their mission was simple. Identify children at risk of trafficking, intervene before they disappeared, support survivors in rebuilding their lives, and prosecute anyone who tried to profit from human suffering. In their first year, they helped 73 children. In their second year, 140. By 1970, the stopping place was operating in 30 states with a staff of 200 and funding from federal grants and private donations. They had helped over 1,000 children escape trafficking networks, had put another 50 traffickers in prison, had changed laws and policies and the way America thought about vulnerable children. Emma became their director of survivor services. She traveled the country speaking at conferences, training social workers, sitting with traumatized children, and telling them that survival was possible, that healing was real, that waiting did not have to end in abandonment. Jim stayed in Montana, kept the ranch running, hired good people to work the land. He was 64 now, gray-haired and weathered, but still strong, still capable of a full day's work. He thought about Korea sometimes, about Chosin, about the 23 Marines he had left behind, but the guilt no longer consumed him. He had learned that redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about doing better in the present, about making different choices, about acting when it mattered. On the 10th anniversary of the custody hearing, December 9th, 1965, Jim sat on his porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Emma was in Denver working late on a case, but she had called that morning to say she loved him, to say thank you, to remind him that everything good in her life started the moment he decided not to drive past a little girl who needed help. The phone rang. Jim went inside to answer it. Dad, Emma's voice. Hey, sweetheart, how's Denver? Cold, but good. We just placed 3 kids in safe homes today. Sisters ages 6, 8, and 10, parents dead, uncle trying to sell them. We got there first. Jim smiled. That's good work. It's your work. Everything we do at the stopping place, we're just following your example, seeing suffering and choosing to act. I just did what anyone should do. But nobody else did. That's the point. You were the one who chose not to walk past. They talked for a while about ranch business and foundation business and all the normal things families talk about when they are separated by distance but connected by love. Before they hung up, Emma said, "Dad, I've been thinking about something. About writing a book, about you, about that day in 55 when you chose to act, about what happened after, about the 43 and the stopping place, and how one decision changed everything. Nobody wants to read about me. You're wrong. People need to read about you. Need to know that one person choosing to see can matter. That it's never too late to do the right thing. That redemption is real. If you write it, change the names. Make it about the kids, not about me. I'll think about it. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Emma." Jim hung up the phone, sat down in his chair, looked at the drawing on the wall, the one Emma had made when she was 7. My family, 2 figures holding hands. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from Chosin to Silver Ridge, from running to acting, from broken to whole. He thought about the Marines he had lost, the children who had been saved, the life he had built from the wreckage of guilt and grief, and he understood something that had taken him 47 years to learn. Heroism was not about never making mistakes. It was about what you did after the mistakes, about whether you let the guilt destroy you or transform you, about whether you kept running or finally chose to act. Jim had chosen to act, and in that choice he had found everything he thought he had lost in Korea: purpose, family, redemption, peace. Outside, the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over a frozen reservoir in Korea, the same stars that had looked down on a little girl waiting on cold steps, the same stars that would keep turning long after this particular story was told and retold and became legend. But Jim did not care about legends, did not care about being remembered. He cared about Emma thriving, about the 43 rebuilding their lives, about the stopping place helping children who were still waiting for someone to care. He cared about the fact that tomorrow, somewhere in America, another person might see a child in need and make the choice to act, to see, to help. Because that was the real legacy, not Jim Collier, not even the stopping place. The legacy was the idea that acting mattered. That one person choosing to care could start a chain reaction that saved dozens, hundreds, thousands. The legacy was hope. Jim stood, turned off the light, walked outside into the Montana night. The wind carried the smell of pine and snow. The temperature was dropping toward freezing. Winter was coming the way it always did in these mountains. But Jim was not cold, had not been truly cold since the day he stopped running and started living. He looked up at the stars one more time, thought about David Chen, about the 23 frozen Marines, about whether they would be proud of what he had become. He thought they would. He thought they would understand that he had finally learned the lesson Chosin tried to teach him. That duty was not about following orders. It was about doing right by the people who counted on you. That sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was to choose not to walk past suffering, not to look away from injustice, not to let convenience triumph over conscience, just to act, and in the acting find yourself again. Jim Collier went back inside his cabin, built a fire in the stove, made coffee, sat down with a book and read until sleep came gently, without nightmares, without guilt. And in the morning when the sun rose over the Rockies and painted the snow gold, he would wake up and do it all again. Because that was what acting meant. Not a single moment of courage, but a daily choice to keep choosing right over easy. To keep seeing suffering and responding. To keep being the person who did not walk past. The man who chose to act had finally found his peace. And somewhere in Denver, 43 survivors were building a better world because of it.